Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're going to get started. Welcome to Voices of Gun Violence, the third annual Community Advocacy and Violence Prevention Summit, sponsored by the Loyola Stands Against Violence Committee. My name is Lucia Garcia, and I am the Director of Student Affairs and Registration for the Parkinson School of Health Sciences and Public Health. And it is my privilege to welcome you here today. Today's Loyola Stands Summit is a signature event of the Parkinson School of Health Sciences and Public Health's National Public Health Week. National Public Health Week brings together communities to celebrate the power of prevention, advocate for health and fair policies, share strategies for increasing health equity, and champion the role of a strong public health system. Today, we bring together voices of gun violence, firsthand perspectives of survivors, families, and an interdisciplinary group of policymakers, public health practitioners, clinicians, educators, researchers, students, elected officials, and community partners. All advocates working to create healthy, equitable, and safe communities. In addition to our phenomenal speakers, we have facilitators whom you will also meet today, all members of the Loyola Stands Committee, Michael Hayes, Sarah Foggy, and Therese Benya. We're also honored to be joined by over 150 participants from across the Chicagoland area and beyond, joining us via webinar hosted by Ana Colares. We value the opportunity to pull together individuals and organizations in our shared work. You can read more about the Loyola Stands Against Gun Violence Committee in today's program and on our website, standagainstgunviolence.org. We hope to continue our conversation and innovative collaboration after today and invite you to join us on the website for future community conversations focused on mental health and trauma-informed care. Stop the bleed, gun policy legislation, and actionable items that we can all focus on to be a part of the solution. We're excited to continue our work together. I would now like to welcome community leader and friend of Loyola, Mayor Nathaniel Booker. Mayor Booker, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, just make sure everyone can hear me. Thank you, Loyola, for inviting me to speak at this great event where we're focused on community advocacy and violence prevention. One of the greatest things that we're celebrating right now in the village of Maywood is for the first time in 4 years, we went through an entire quarter with 0 homicides in the village of Maywood. Thank you. We've truly been taking a force in regards to focusing on community advocacy as well as violence prevention. So one of the things that we did at the beginning of this new administration is we started the Crisis Management and Public Safety Collaborative, where we focused on, from a high school standpoint, elementary school standpoint, all governing bodies and community advocates, how can we focus on crisis management? We know there's a lot of mental health issues that proceed to get to us in violence prevention. We know that gun violence is a huge issue within our community because while we celebrated 1 quarter of no homicides, the second day of the second quarter, we had a shooting and killing. So we are, again, rolling up our sleeves, trying to figure out what things we can do. We've received great finances in regards to youth development, youth education, violence prevention. We've partnered right now with over 25 different organizations to focus on community advocacy and violence prevention. So we look forward, if you have not partnered with the Village of Maywood yet, in Booker at maywood-il.org, just shoot me an email. We'll look so forward to having you be a part of us, making sure that we bring every element of a healthy Maywood to the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Booker. I would now like to invite forward Michael Hayes, chaplain at Loyola University Medical Center, to begin our day in prayer.
Thank you, Lucia. Let us all stand. I know we are observing social distancing to keep us safe from this pandemic, but I'd like, if you can and if you're close enough, to just place your hand on the person standing next to you, on their shoulder. And let us pause. Gracious God, the persons my hands touch are your creation. They are imbued with a spark of the divine, a holy dignity. It is the birthright of us all, no matter what race or color or creed. Any violence by gunfire that extinguishes that spark is not, in the final analysis, robbery against that victim alone. It is robbery against all of God's creation because the loss diminishes us all. Dear God, make the people in this room more sensitive to that reality. Stir us to action when we hear the voice of Abel's blood crying out in despair. Preside over these proceedings and bless us with abundance. It is in the name of Christ our Savior we pray. Amen. You may be seated. As we move into our presentations for the day, I'd like to make a quick announcement, some housekeeping for everyone. We are aware that you may be in and out of this room through the course of the morning. And we just want you to know, please feel free and welcome to come and go as you need. Restrooms and water fountains are located in the lobby past the security desk. We welcome guests to participate also in the question and answer portion of the presentations. Now, we know owing to time that we cannot answer every question you may have, but for your convenience, in the bag that you got in registration, you're going to see a card like this. And if you are moved to ask a question, you can just jot the question down and we will have facilitators to pick up your questions. You can pass the questions to the end of your row and they'll be picked up there. Our facilitators will collect and present these questions to our speakers. Our webinar participants are also invited to add their questions in the chat. At the close of today, we will also invite you to participate in our community art piece and to join us for a grab and go lunch that's going to be in the lobby for your convenience. So without further delay, it is my honor to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Fred Gutenberg. Fred began his public life after the murder of his beautiful 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, in the Parkland school shooting on February 14th. The day after the murder, Fred decided to attend a public vigil in Parkland. While there, the mayor asked him to speak. His words shook the nation, and he has not stopped since. Only 4 months prior to the murder of his daughter, Fred's brother Michael passed away in October 2017 from cancer related to his service in 9/11 as one of the original first responders to the World Trade Center. Following his involvement in these two distinctly American tragedies, Fred has traveled the country talking about both events, but also talking about perspective, perseverance, and resilience. He discusses pivotal moments in our lives and how we respond to those moments. Fred uses his speech to inspire others. Fred and his wife, Jennifer, now spend time challenging our elected officials to do more. That's something we all should be doing. They began a nonprofit organization dedicated to Jamie's life called Orange Ribbons for Jamie. He has been a regular on TV news programs, online and print media. Through the formation of the nonprofit, this is now Fred's full-time mission. We are honored to welcome Mr. Fred Gutenberg.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. One thing about me when I do the speeches, I don't use prepared written remarks. And so I try to keep to a time frame. Sometimes I ramble, So maybe if you could just sort of put up your hand for me when there's about 10 minutes so that I make sure I save time for questions. Because that's always, to me, the best part of these conversations. Just so you all know, there's not a question I won't answer. So this is a time for us to really engage because we're all in this together. As I stand here in front of you all today, you need to know the reality of gun violence doesn't just dissipate after the event happens. In fact, this week, starting this past Monday, the trial for my daughter's killer began. As I stand here today, they are currently getting started with the process of seating a jury over 4 years later. It doesn't go away, and that is why having a chance to be with all of you in this public health, in this health facility matters so deeply to me. Because let me just say this, and then I'll get started. Reducing gun violence and saving lives never should have been a Second Amendment conversation. It is a public health conversation, and having a chance to talk to all of you matters deeply in how we solve this going forward. So thank you for having me. I'm going to ask you all to just indulge me for a minute and go to a happy place. Shut your eyes. Think of someone you love. Think of doing your favorite thing. Think of Democrats and Republicans all getting along. Think of COVID canceled. Just go to a happy place. Think of the thing you love most. I want you to close your eyes and focus on that with me for just a few seconds and get to that calm, peaceful, happy place for me. Boom! Just like that. You see, people always say to me, I can't imagine how you feel. I get that comment all the time. But I spend my life wanting people to imagine how I feel. I spend my life trying to help people imagine how I feel. Because I need all of you for the rest of your lives to be a part of doing more about it, to be a part of changing this conversation, to imagine being in that happiest moment in your life and having it abruptly end that way. February 14th, 2018, I was just a normal dad of 2 teenage kids and 2 dogs. My wife and I had the perfect American family. And on that morning, I was busy rushing my children out of the house, partly because they were running late for school, but also I had a plan. You see, it was Valentine's Day. And this happened to have been the Valentine's Day where I had decided I wanted to introduce my kids to the romance of Valentine's Day. And I had a whole plan for that evening. And I needed to get them out of the house so I could get busy working on my plan. And I was busy rushing my kids out the door. You gotta go, you're gonna be late. As was typical in my house, they were running late. As was typical in my house, they were blaming each other and I didn't want to hear it. And as was typical in my house, my 2 dogs wanted some attention too. So I was trying to get my kids out the door. And my last words to my children that morning were, you gotta go. You're gonna be late. Not, I love you. It was, you gotta go. You're gonna be late. And so I tell you that because I don't want you to have a moment like that. I want you to think about my last moment. I want you to think about what it would feel like to send 2 children to school and only have one of them come home. I want you to imagine my last conversation with my son that afternoon before learning my daughter was killed. My son called me that day just after 2 p.m. He said, Dad. Now my son is a jokester, so I wasn't sure where this was going at first. I'm like, what? There's a shooter at my school. And I did not immediately take him seriously until he said, and I can't find Jamie, because he looked after his sister like a hawk. He looked after her safety. And as soon as he said that, I took him seriously. I said, well, where are you? What are you doing? And he said, they're making us run, but I can't find Jamie. I have to turn around. And I said, you can't turn around. You need to run. He's like, but I can't find Jamie. I said, I'll worry about your sister. You need to run. And as I'm on the phone with my son, he's crying out, there's more bullets. And those were the shots on the third floor that were killing his sister. And I'm listening to this on the phone. If anyone wants to know why I do what I do now, it is that phone call, and it is the fact that I've had to bury my daughter. If anyone wants to know why I want you to know every detail, it is because I want you to not allow the normalization of gun violence to be a part of our lives. Folks, I live with guilt every second of every day that I wasn't doing this before it was my kid. I live with guilt every second of every day that I wasn't doing this when it was happening on other streets and other communities. I don't want any of you to ever have that guilt. And so that's why I do what I do now. And so I have a serious question for all of you. Who here wants to get shot? And I'm not surprised at the answer. But if you don't want the people you love to get shot, for you younger people, if you don't want to bring up children in a society where active shooter drills are the norm, where you have to worry about where you send them, then join me, do more, be a part of the solution. There's so much more we can and should be doing, using our power, using our voice, using our vote. With that, I want to tell you my story. That guy there, that's my brother, Dr. Michael Guttenberg. He was an emergency room physician. So for those of you who don't know, I have medicine in my blood. My sister is also a physician in Cincinnati, Ohio. My mom was a nurse. At the time of 9/11, my brother was the deputy medical director of the New York Fire Department. His office was across the street from the World Trade Center. And he was in the World Trade Center with a team of about 10 other physicians before the second building even got hit. They were setting up a triage. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the buildings, in a connecting building between building 2 and I think building 7. And there was a big garage, the garager that was going to be stored with supplies. And I tell you that because while they were there waiting to see patients, they started to hear more noise. And this was after the second building was hit. And then they realized there was dust and debris coming down on them. And the World Trade Center was starting to collapse on them. They hid out in this room. And amazingly, while everything around them turned to rubble, this room did not collapse. And my brother spent the next 16 days at Ground Zero treating people and continuing to breathe in all that toxic dust. And in 2013, that toxic dust took a toll on his body. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He had Whipple surgery, chemo, radiation, and amazingly, my brother seemed like he was going to cheat death again because he seemed like he was cancer-free. He seemed like he was going to be okay, but you're all in medicine. You know pancreatic cancer. It's never that simple. And in 2016, cancer came back. Started in his lungs, but then in his liver and in his stomach. He spent the next year of his life extremely sick. And my brother passed away in October of 2017. I'm one of 5 kids. My parents are still alive. As a family, we've never dealt with grief. We've never dealt with loss until my brother died. So later in October of 2017, when we came home from burying my brother, my wife's birthday is October 30th. We're sitting around the table, my wife, myself, and my 2 children. And I say to my wife, what do you want for your birthday? And we're a dog-obsessed family. We already had 1 dog. My wife said, I want another dog. I didn't want another dog, but my wife said she wanted another dog. And now the kids, well, they wanted another dog too. And I'm like, you know what? We're just here trying to all feel better. We'll get another dog, which we did in November of 2017. And I will tell you, that dog saved my family's life, because only 4 months later, that's my baby. 4 months later, February 14th, 2018, I sent my children to school, and my daughter didn't come home. I visit my forever 14 daughter at the cemetery. That's where I have to go to be close to her, to be physically near her, because of gun violence. Unfortunately, this happens in communities across America every single day. My daughter was killed in Parkland. We didn't know from gun violence in Parkland. It always happened elsewhere until it didn't. And I promise you, I dedicate the rest of my life to doing something about gun violence across this country, on every street, in every community, for the rest of my life. It's not normal. It's not okay. And I want you young people to grow up in a society that treats this differently. Before I go further, I want to introduce you to Jamie. I want you to see Jamie in life. I want you to get to know what I miss out on. And I want you to imagine a person you love and doing this, where you no longer make new memories, but you have to see her through videos and pictures. It continues on and on. Communities continue to deal with the aftermath of every next incident. My son deals with the emotional trauma to this day of what happened to his sister and him. You know, he was there. He listened to it. He ran from it. And he's to this day angry at me that he didn't turn around and go back in. And he would have died if he did. But that's reality. You all heard stories like this, and it doesn't end. We can't allow politicians and media to cover a story for a few hours and move on. We can't, because it doesn't end, it doesn't stop, and our ability to move on isn't there. And so I purposefully, intentionally want you to know me and my family, because I want you to do everything possible going forward to make sure your family isn't next. And people always say to me, well, what more can we do? And there's a lot. Whether it's on social media, whether it's harassing politicians and going to town halls. People don't go to town halls anymore, but you should. Or voting. It took us a lot of years to get to this place where this became such a problem, and we're not going to fix it overnight. But I will tell you this, if you would have told me to February of 2018, only 4+ years ago, that we'd have a president who will sign gun safety legislation, a Congress that is debating and passing gun safety legislation, and a Senate that is 50-50, I would have told you there's no chance we'd ever have come this far. There was no chance we'd ever be in this strong a position. We are 2 votes away. That's all it takes to break the filibuster in the Senate, from being able to get something done. That's the good news. We are closer than we've ever been. The bad news, we're also closer than we've ever been to permanently losing the chance to do so. Because this next election, while we're only 2 votes away, we're only 7 votes away from going backwards. And if we do, we will possibly permanently lose the chance to do anything about gun violence. If we do, not just gun violence, but all other things that matter to people in this room, whether it's climate, voting rights, and all sorts of other important issues. This election coming up is, even though it's not presidential, the most important election of our lifetime. So people want to know whether or not they need to turn out and vote in 22. Yes, you do. And you need to make sure everyone you know shows up and votes. And we need a presidential year type turnout in 22, even though it's not a presidential election. This election is that important. We are closer than we've ever been to doing really important things. We're also closer than we've ever been to permanently losing the chance. We vote in 22 and we get it right, we can get national gun safety legislation. So before I go forward, I want you all to just do me a favor before I get to some of the politics of this. I want you all, when this is over today, to call someone you know, who you love, and just tell them for no reason at all. I want you all, when you're with the people you love, to look them in the eye and tell them in person. I can tell you, I live every second of every day knowing it wasn't the last words my daughter heard from me. And so, again, before I go forward, I just want you all to do me that favor, to make sure you tell the people you love how much you love them. And then I want you to make sure you do everything in your power to fighting for their rights to live and your rights to live. After the Parkland shooting, the first 24 hours, my world was in a tailspin. I honestly don't even know that I realized that it was gun violence that took my daughter's life. It's just like things weren't registering for me right away. I was busy dealing with family, my wife and my son, family coming into town, planning a funeral, writing a eulogy. I just wasn't really focusing on like the specifics. It just, things were in a tailspin. The next night, I went to the Parkland Vigil, which I think you've probably all heard a bit about. Thousands of people were there. And when I got there, the mayor asked me if I wanted to speak. So what the hell? I'll go, I'll speak. So I went up without any prepared remarks. And I just started talking from my heart about my daughter. And I looked out at the audience and I see all these people crying. And for the first time, like it registered solidly with me, this was gun violence. And I talked about feeling broken. And I talked about not telling my kids that morning that I loved them. But then I said something that night I don't know that I had any evidence to say it, but it has turned out to be accurate. I said this time, the world of gun violence has come out and visited the wrong dad and the wrong community. And my community and I and the other parents, we haven't stopped. We are doing everything we can to shape this country and to try and force, thank you. And listen, and I get it. There's an economic toll. I guess I was in a good fortune that I was able to just like stop the rest of my life and make this my life. But this is my life now because your lives are worth it to me. And that's what I got to do. So that night, I remember talking about all of this. And then I got home and I walked into my house. I'll clean it up. But I said, I'm going to break that effing gun lobby. And that is what I'm ultimately determined to do. They are not what they once were. They have to. They've been broken, but they still exist. And as long as they exist, they still get to cause trouble. And as long as they exist, they still influence politicians who we need to vote out. And so they are broken, but they exist. And we shouldn't assume they're going away anytime soon. A week after the vigil, I went to the CNN town hall and I had a chance to confront Senator Rubio. And he and I, we didn't get off on a good start, and I'm okay with that. For that entire week, I listened to him say a lot of things about, what caused the Parkland shooting and 17 people to die, but never once did he mention the word gun. Never once did he say it was an issue of gun violence. He said a lot of things, a lot of nonsense, but he never said gun. And so I called him out that night. And I haven't shut up since, because we deserve better from our elected leaders. And if they don't deliver, then we show up and we vote. Our vote does matter. Our vote does count. It only doesn't count if we don't use it. And so show up and use it. So I speak a lot about this guy. And the week after Jamie was killed, he was a private citizen. I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. And I didn't return, I didn't answer phone calls I didn't recognize because there was just too many of them. And he left a message and he said, I'm Joe Biden. I'd like to talk to you. He goes, I'll try to call you back tonight at 6 p.m. If you don't answer, that's okay, I understand. But if you want to talk to me, I hope you'll pick up. And of course I did. We spent almost an hour on the phone. He wanted to know about my family. He wanted to know a lot about Jamie and Jesse, my son. He wanted to know what my plan was. And I didn't really have a plan. I only said, the only thing I can tell you with certainty is I want to break that effing gun lobby. And he was a private citizen, so we both were more comfortable back then using 4-letter words. And that's when he spoke to me about mission and purpose. And that has become my guiding theme ever since that conversation, because I am on a mission now. This is my life purpose. He invited me a few weeks later to an in-person meeting. He was holding a fundraising event for his son Beau Biden's foundation in Palm Beach, Florida. And I brought another one of the Parkland dads with me. And at that meeting, I figured we would shake his hand. I wasn't expecting much of a conversation with him. So we get there, he goes around, there's about 250 people there. He's shaking all sorts of hands. Then he has his aide pull myself and the other dad into a private room. And again, I'm thinking like a minute or two. 20 minutes into this conversation, I said, you have like a whole room full of hundreds of people out there waiting to hear you speak. Don't you need to go? And he just said, this is more important. That's who he is. And he wanted to finish the conversation. And for those of you who have been through grief, or you haven't yet, I want you to know the advice he gave me, because it was the single most important piece of advice that anybody did. And it's this: we all grieve differently. He came prepared to talk about numbers. 92% of all marriages fall apart after an event like this. And he didn't tell me that because he wanted me to be fearful. He told me that because he wanted me to be prepared. He wanted me to make sure we were taking the steps to be in the 8%. And it has saved my life, that advice. Because while I have gone out on this very public and vocal crusade, my son and my wife have been very private. I would have thought there was something wrong with us if Joe Biden didn't tell me. We all grieve differently, but we all have to find ways to support one another while we grieve. It was the single most important piece of advice that anyone gave me, and I'll be forever grateful to him and the steps that he has taken in a very complicated political world to do something about gun violence. So, you know, before I go forward, I want to say something to one other politician, and it's a Republican, and it's in a state nearby, Ohio. Former Governor Kasich also reached out to me back then. And I want to tell you this because he is a Republican, and he wanted to do something about gun violence. He was committed to it, and he didn't succeed. Ohio's a tough state. He didn't succeed, but he tried real hard. And that connection to John Kasich has convinced me that even though gun violence is not a partisan issue, bullets don't know what party you are when they shoot you, okay? The response often is, but not always. And so it is always worth reaching out and trying to find anyone who will help you to solve this problem. We currently have over 41,000 a year who die from gun violence. Now, about 2/3 of that are suicides, but that's still gun violence. We have about 75,000 injured yearly, and it's now over 100 a day are killed. Little perspective, while we are sitting here, while I'm speaking today, call for about an hour, someone is burying a victim of gun violence. Someone is learning that their family is the newest victim of gun violence, and someone is also getting shot. That's all happening in this hour. It's just the numbers. That's America today. That's not normal. It's not okay. And that is why the work you all do and your commitment to this matters so deeply. I told you about my brother. After 9/11, this country stepped up, right? We did everything we could. We even accepted limits on some freedoms to stop domestic terrorism. But we're not taking the same kind of action. To stop foreign terrorism, but we're not taking the same kind of action with guns, which is, in my mind, a form of domestic terrorism. When we are getting shot on our streets, that's what that is. We can do more. We can. There is so much we can do as a country to reduce the gun violence death rate, reduce the instances of gun violence, and to reduce the severity of gun violence injuries when they happen. And I hope those three things that I just said resonate with all of you in the public health world, because those three things all get to why this is a public health conversation. Saving lives and reducing injuries, that is public health. And that is how we have to talk about this. But there's more we can do. And I do have hope. We see many states, this is one of them, doing really important good things. We see an administration that is trying to do really important good things. And we see a business community that is turning, okay, that is doing more. Just look, for example, at Dick's Sporting Goods. They changed their entire business model and they got rewarded for it because their sales have gone up. Walmart changed their business model on how they handle guns. You see companies now taking public stands and doing training on how to address gun violence in the workplace. Remember, the workplace now isn't just in buildings. In many cases, it's at home. Are your guns locked up? There was just an instance in Florida about 6, 7 months ago where a mother working from home was on a Zoom call with colleagues and her 2-year-old child with an unlocked gun shot and killed the mother on this Zoom call. So the home is the new workplace. Are your guns locked up? Not saying you shouldn't have it. Listen, I'm not going to get to that conversation. But if you have them in the home, lock them up. You know, there's things we can do. So, actually, I'm not sure how this slide ended up in here, but I'll talk about it because I'm proud of it. To me, the holy grail of addressing gun violence is actually ammunition. When Jamie was killed, we had 300 million weapons on the streets of America. Now we have about 400 million. That's reality. And the problem is, if you're a prohibited purchaser of a firearm in America by law, you're also a prohibited purchaser of ammunition. But there's no requirement for a background check on ammunition. So you can be in possession of a weapon that you stole, that got trafficked on your street, that somebody left unlocked. And even though you're a prohibited buyer, you can walk into the store and buy the bullets because nobody's going to check. And so my friend Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz has introduced Jamie's Law into Congress. We're a long ways away from getting it passed, but that's a law that I'm going to keep on fighting for because that will save lives immediately. As many of you know, I wrote a book that I think you all received copies of today called Find the Helpers. I spoke before about our current president and what a helper he has been to me and other political leaders like John Kasich. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about who I think this nation's ultimate helpers are, and that's our kids. I have met kids across this country that are truly amazing. Now, I will tell you, you all know of the March for Our Lives kids. I knew those kids before the shooting. And honestly, I thought they were a bunch of knuckleheads. You know, I knew them. They were just kids. They were teenagers. And I thought, like all the other kids that I knew back then, including my own, that they didn't know how to communicate because they did this all day, right? They're all on their phone. I was wrong. And we've all been wrong about the kids. And here's why. They do know how to communicate. They know what they want. They're fierce in asking for it. And this thing that I thought was destroying them, actually, this was their weapon. Because of this, they knew how to organize, strategize, communicate, and pull things together in a way that I'm not sure us adults have yet to figure out. They are impressive. And they are our future leaders. And I, for one, can't wait until more of them are running for office because they will fix this mess. So for those of you who are younger in this room, thank you for everything you do. And for those of you with kids, go home and tell them you're proud of them. At Jamie's funeral, the funeral director, at her funeral, actually, no, the day I was planning it, handed me a journal. And he said, have you ever journaled before? I said, no, I was not much of a writer back then. He goes, I want you to take this and I want you to start. Because I think this will be helpful for you. And so I did. I started writing about my days, what happened, what didn't happen, what made me feel better that day as I was trying to figure out my way forward, what made me feel worse. And in April of 2018, I told my wife I wanted to write a book. The original intention was to write a book about just my story of being a part of two American tragedies and how the country responded differently to both. And that's what I wrote. And I spent a lot of time working on it. And I shared it with somebody who is in the publishing business, who I trust really deeply. And he handed it back to me and he said, it's an important story because you're not done writing. And I said, what do you mean I'm not done? I said, this is everything I have to say. This is my story. He goes, no, but it's not. He goes, the most interesting thing I see in this book is on every page, you talk about other people and the role that they played. And he goes, I want you to go back and focus more on that. And so I started kind of thinking through, how do I fill in a lot of details about these other people? And the very first person who really convinced me that this was the right path to go on and was going to be worth rewriting the book was from 9/11. On 9/11, for those of you who remember that day, as I'm sure most of you do, there may be some younger people in the room. My brother, we knew my brother. We know he's the kind of person running into buildings when other people are running out. And when we didn't hear from him all morning, we started to become fearful of the worst. By early afternoon, we were becoming convinced he was probably gone. But then an amazing thing happened. This lady went to where they set up the triage that afternoon. She never gave her name or anything like that, but she brought a pen and paper and went to all the first responders and said, I'm sure you have a loved one. Why don't you just give me their name and number and I'll call them for you? And this amazing lady, probably around 3, 4 that afternoon, called my parents to say, I've spoken to your loved one. He is alive. He will call you when he can. On 9/11, at around 4 in the afternoon, that was the first sign of life we had from my brother. From this lady, who I've never met, who's always been one of my heroes through my entire adult life, a hero to many, but I don't know who she is. But she was the ultimate helper. And when I started thinking about her, who originally was just like a quick sentence in my book, it is important for me to talk more about her. And then I started going through the whole book, and really, for the first time in my adult life, it hit me. There's not a single thing that I've ever been a part of or done that was all because of me. For the first time in my adult life, I realized the importance that people have played in every single thing that has happened to me or for me. And I like to think I've played that kind of a role for other people. And so I started to think of my whole life differently. And for the first time, the idea of helpers became really meaningful. The people who lifted me after my daughter was killed and continue to do so this day. As we watch this country go through COVID, we've become a country of helpers to one another, or I'd like to think we have. Sometimes we need the help, and we're very fortunate to have helpers. Sometimes other people need our help, and we have a responsibility to be helpers to them. But I tell you all of this because I rewrote the book to really build up the significance of all of these other people. And then I came across this quote from one of the childhood shows that I grew up watching, Mr. Rogers. And the quote is, my mother used to say a long time ago, whenever there would be any real catastrophe in the movies or on the air, she would say, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers, because if you look for the helpers, you will know that there is hope. Listen, I gotta tell you, in spite of what has happened to me, I have such hope for us, for our families, for our communities going forward, because of the amazing people that I meet across this country every day who do inspire me and give me that hope. And that quote is the reason why I ultimately called the book Find the Helpers. I'm getting ready to close out. I hope we still have time for questions. I want to talk to you all about perspective, because we all have moments in our life where we say, that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's an exam, an issue with the job. That was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I've had all those things happen. You know, I've been unemployed. I had my business that had highs and lows. I've been a corporate employee with the highs and lows that go with that. I've lost my daughter. I didn't lose my daughter. My daughter was killed. I visit my daughter in a cemetery, and nothing comes close. Nothing comes close. And I want you to remember me when you're having a bad moment. And I want you to know you're strong and you are resilient and you are going to be okay and you are going to get through it. I want you to know the way to get through those worst moments are with your helpers. But I also want you to know, ultimately, what matters most about the worst moment is here. And this has been a lesson to me. And this is actually the final paragraph of my book. And it's really a message to our kids, but it's a message to everybody. And I want to read it. To anyone who reads this book, especially the kids and the young adults, and to the future leaders and heroes, you will have many moments in your life, some bigger than others. Ultimately, what matters more than the moment is how you respond to it. How you react to your moment when it comes is what will define you. We'll all have our moments, but ultimately what matters more than that moment is what we do next. And I think about the families from Parkland, the More to Our Lives kids, and the families from across this country who are affected by gun violence every day, who step up and become and use their voices, who are determined to do something about it. I think of a guy like Sully, who landed a plane on the Hudson rather than crash it and save those lives. And I think about a guy like Zelensky right now in Ukraine, whose country is under fierce assault, but the way he's reacting to that moment is what will define him in the future of that country. And I think about all of you in the healthcare world who, in the face of COVID, have stepped up. Not always easy, right? Not everybody didn't always appreciate what you were doing, but you did your work to save lives. You stepped up. You didn't react to what maybe people said or did because you didn't agree with it. You went back and you continued the hard work of saving lives. Ultimately, what matters more than the moment is what we do next. And that is what will define the future generation of heroes and leaders. What they do and how they react is it. And so to end, I just want to tell you a little bit about Jamie. As a competitive dancer, Jamie found this quote, "Dreams and dedication are a powerful combination." And she had it posted in her bedroom. It inspired her every day. Anyone who knew Jamie knew that was the quote she lived her life by. It's now mine. It is what I live my life by. I have a dream of ending gun violence in this country, or at least significantly reducing it. And I am dedicating my life to this. And so I thank you for your time today. I hope this was valuable for all of you. And I hope the rest of the program goes well this morning. Thank you so much.
Mr. Gunberg, thank you again for coming to speak with us. Well, first of all, I want to make a comment. I think your talk touched everybody here because your initial point of having other people feel what you felt, I think we can all identify with that. But as the father of 2 teens and a wife who's asking for a second dog, I really identify with you. But I don't know if you were in the public sphere before this happened to you, or if that was a big part of your shift in your whole life.
I
But
was
now-
not.
Yeah, but now that you are, I mean, tell me about the opposition and tell me, who is opposing this?
Listen, there's an entire group of elected people and people who vote for them and a well-funded lobby that oppose reducing gun violence, because gun violence is good for business for them. Let's face it. If you just go back a few years ago, I got pulled out of a State of the Union and arrested because the former president opposed this and stood at a State of the Union and said, I will defend your Second Amendment rights, which are under attack all over this country. And every time he made a statement like that, I got threats via email and on social media. And then like that, like a good portion of the Republicans on that side of the aisle, they all jumped up and started cheering. And I screamed out, what about victims of gun violence like my daughter? And for that, I got removed and detained. The reality is there's a real opposition. However, it is very much a financial political opposition. The majority of Americans, and that includes gun owners, actually want to do something. It's on background checks, it's about 90% now. Okay. So I'm at a place now where I am no longer so much worrying about the stupid arguments of that opposition. Okay. I'm just not. When I have the chance to talk to people, I just say to them, do you want to see fewer deaths related to gun violence? Of course we do. Do you want to see less gun violence? Of course we do. Do you want to see gun violence injuries that are not as significant when gun violence happens? Well, of course we do. I said, well, good, then we agree. So let's start there. And that's how I try to do it. I'm no longer going to argue Second Amendment. To me, reducing gun violence injuries and deaths is not a Second Amendment conversation. It is public health. And that's how I try to maneuver it.
Maybe we have time for one more question.
Hey, how you doing today?
Hey, how are you?
Hey, so I'm Chief Willis of the Maywood Police Department. So, I thank you first for coming up and speaking on the platform that you're speaking in reference to gun violence. Because from my side of the house, I see it all the time, and it's unfortunate. So my question is, what you just said, and caveat off of this young man question here, with the NRA and Second Amendment, what do you see as far as the perspective on how they look into this? I know it's a Second Amendment right, but the way guns come into our country, come into our city, now it's got to the point where you can buy, we call it a ghost gun, right off the internet, and now and I don't know if the NRA anybody has anything to do with this. You buy a gun, no serial number, but if I want to sell a gun, I stencil a serial number in it and the gun is legit. What's your take on that?
Well, first, thank you for everything you do. Because one of the, because I listen, our law enforcement community, you have to deal on the front lines with the reality of this explosion of guns and ghost guns and not knowing just how dangerous a situation you're going to go into. And one of the things I try and tell people across this country is gun safety is police safety. And if you really actually value police and law enforcement, you should be getting behind doing something about reducing gun violence. And so that's number one. But you raise a tremendous issue because, there's the issue of ghost guns, but there's also guns that get trafficked. Listen, Illinois has got good laws, but you're only as safe as your closest border. Indiana and Ohio, and guns come from elsewhere. So we really need a national solution. And ghost guns are a tremendous threat to our ability to do anything. And so we need federal regulations there. The Biden administration is currently working on some executive actions on that. But right now, it's not enough, right? It's not enough. You're seeing it. And that's why this 22 election to me matters so deeply. Because if we succeed in holding the House and getting those few extra seats in the Senate, we can actually get real legislation with real teeth passed to start dealing with these things. There's 400 million weapons on the streets. But if we want to reduce gun violence with what's already out there, that's why ammunition to me is such a holy grail of this effort, okay? That to me is the way you can do so immediately. And if we hold the House and we get the Senate, we can get legislation around ammunition passed that doesn't interfere with anybody's Second Amendment rights. Let me just say this right now. That whole Second Amendment argument is a bunch of BS. In Florida, 3 weeks after Parkland, okay, now, and Florida is one of the states that has not been good on this issue, but 3 weeks after Parkland, we passed gun safety legislation. We raised the age to 21. We passed red flag laws. We put a waiting period in place. And guess what? There's not a single legal lawful gun owner who ever thinks about any of that legislation we passed because it's not interfering with their rights to be a legal lawful gun owner. But it is saving lives, and it is keeping guns out of the hands of people who intend harm to themselves or someone else. And so, to answer your question, it starts with just not letting the BS of that argument continue. And we vote in 22. Thank you.
I have one question from our virtual audience.
Yeah.
This is from Bonnie, and she first acknowledges, yes, we all need to be voting this next election cycle, but are there 2 or 3 other practical ways that we can all get involved?
Well, listen, I'll say voting is number 1, 2, and 3. But yeah, go to town halls, harass your elected leaders, okay? And if they're not holding town halls, call them out for that. Write op-eds for your local newspapers. Get on social media. Go call your news stations and see if you can't get on and talk about what those who you elected are not doing to keep the streets in your community safe. We don't have to be silent. You know, that's the gun lobby had a lot of success for a lot of years because they used fear and intimidation to cause victims to not speak out. We don't have to be silent. And so don't be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. Your daughter was beautiful,
Thank
wonderful
you.
dancer. I think you mentioned that this is a public health issue. And I think one of the things we haven't spoken about was the shooter and that individual's health and what we can do to, mitigate that kind of drive in an individual. What can we do better to serve a person's mental health needs? I think that's something that we need to focus on as well, because if you never pick up the gun, there won't be the violence.
Oh, listen, mental health is absolutely a part of reducing gun violence. And it's not just about do potential shooters get the resources and the help they need before they turn to shooters. I look at the whole mental health conversation in an even different way, which is 2/3 of gun violence is people turning a gun on themselves. Okay, and so there is no question people are not getting the resources and the help that they need when they need it. And again, when you see politicians after gun violence say it's all mental health, demand that they tell you what their plan is to fix it and where they're going to get the resources from. Don't let them use it as a political statement. Make sure if they mean it, that they have some kind of a solution that they want to talk about, or tell them you're going to vote them out if they don't. Because it is true, mental health is a part of this. The problem is too many elected people say that only to not have to say gun, but they don't actually have a plan or dedicated resources to deal with it. And so, again, the mental health issue isn't just about what we did for potential shooters before they became. Again, 2/3 of gun violence, 2/3 of that 40,000+ a year who get killed, it's suicide. How are we letting that happen in America? And so thank you for asking that question.
Thank you so much. Let's give Fred another round of applause and thank you for being here.